Here's why you probably shouldn't set time limits all the time. I said to myself, I'll be at this station a year. I'll get back downtown. 3 years later, I'm still there. And that's when I started to think, man, my timetable is off. And I put a lot of pressure on myself. But just as I got to that point, and this is also something about my life, when I'm really looking at maybe a dark moment, there's a light at the proverbial end of the tunnel. And that light was, I got a call from a radio station that I had sent, and they said, hey, we have an opening. Boom. And I was back in a big Chicago station.
Welcome, badass entrepreneurs. It's time to hear the world's movers, shakers, and difference makers spill their secrets for unlimited success. So strap in, for Badass Entrepreneurs Only begins now. Hi, I'm Coach Dan Gordon, and today I'm speaking with Garry Meier, one of the most influential and controversial radio DJs in Chicago in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Garry came on the radio scene in Chicago at a time when radio was as exciting as elevator music. He single-handedly brought life and excitement to the market by pushing against a rigid establishment, building a nationally known brand, and in the process, creating a cult-like following of dedicated fans who followed his every word. Garry is well known for the now infamous Disco Demolition Night in 1979, where he and his on-air partner piled up hundreds of albums during a baseball game and literally blew them up. If you want to know what it takes to break through a market and develop rabid fans, then hang in there and hang on every word you're about to hear, because Garry Meier is going to give you the truth. Now, how did Garry build this much dedication in his fans? And how can we do the same in our business? That's what I'm hoping to find out today. We are so unbelievably fortunate to have him with us. So let's get badass. Garry Meier, welcome, welcome, welcome to For Badass Entrepreneurs Only.
Danny. Okay, now, where do we begin, Dan? What do you want to talk about?
So look, right now, I want to talk about something that entrepreneurs struggle with all the time, and that's discouragement. Now, you pursued a career where few people even make a living wage, much less reach the success that you achieved. So in those early days of your radio career, did you ever wonder if you were ever going to actually make a living at it?
Well, I think I thought, yeah, I'd like to make a living. Why would I be doing this or pursue this as a career? But to your point about people not making a living, well, in the early stages, when you're working in smaller markets, yes, the pay is not really great, but you're not doing it for the pay. You're doing it because you have a passion for radio and broadcasting. And that's what I had. And I didn't think about, okay, I'll make this much now and then this much down the road. That didn't enter in until later on, because I just wanted to be on the radio. And let me give you a couple of the foundation points of how I got into radio. There was a little in between high school and pharmacy school, and I worked construction for a couple of years because, to your point about making money, after I had some high school and a year or two of college, I really didn't have any money, and I got tired of not having money. And my cousin was working in construction and got me a job, and it paid really well. And I thought, well, let me do this, and then maybe I'll go back to pharmacy school, and at least I'll have some money in my pocket. Now, in between all that, there was a guy on the radio who would read a listener's letter every day, and he also talked about reincarnation. And he always said that he was going to come back someday when he died as a butterfly. One day I walk out of my house and there's a large monarch butterfly lying on the lawn, dead, but in perfect condition. The guy's name, Larry Lujak. I'm going to send this guy a letter and tell him I think I killed his uncle. I got this letter and I taped the butterfly to the piece of paper. I sent it to him. And then several days later, he read my letter on his show. And when I heard that, I always thought, wow, they make a living doing that? That sounds like fun. And after I heard my material, really thought, I've got to pursue this somehow. And then the movie American Graffiti came out. And when I saw Wolfman Jack movie, and I loved the whole centerpiece of him on the radio and everybody listening to him, that was another moment. And so I started pursuing it. And by pursuing it, I looked in and I don't know, some people might not even know what this is anymore. They were called yellow pages. And this was a paper phone book where there
Right.
were businesses listed in it. And I looked for broadcasting schools, and there were about 3 in Chicago. I just picked one at random, started going, and that was my start into this career.
I think you're kind of discounting the courage, or maybe like just lack of fear that it took to jump into something where it was pretty uncertain. And pharmacy school would have been a much more practical and certain career. And so when you got out and when you're like a midnight DJ, was there a time where you're thinking, is this ever going to work? Is this going to take off?
Okay, Dan, let me say, first of all, nothing is guaranteed. No matter what profession you're in, there could be all kinds of twists and turns. Now, you're right. Pharmacy is a solid profession. And today, it's a really good profession because it's in demand. There's a shortage of pharmacists, and you can get a job and make really good money right out of the box. I understand that. Here's the problem. I wasn't good in school. I would have never made it through school. I had no choice but to leave because I didn't have the acumen. I was really trying to stay out of Vietnam. I had heard if you had a medical school deferment, you could stay out. And I went for that. I was working in a drugstore, and I just grabbed on to pharmacy because I saw this guy that had just gotten out of pharmacy school and making money and all that. And I thought, I'll do that. I was grabbing onto anything. And that's my path into pharmacy. And then when that fizzled, I had at least the construction money in the bank to do this broadcasting school and not have to work. I did continue to work part-time in various ways to make a little money, but I had a little bit of a bank account so I could take this so-called risk, but I had to pursue it. It was a calling, and I really enjoyed the whole process. So I start the school, and I was in Chicago, and I never worked in a smaller market, and I consider that quite lucky because you're right. A lot of people have to ply their trade in the radio in smaller markets and then hopefully work back up to a top 10, 15 market. I was in the 3rd largest market, and I was really fortunate that I got a job in Chicago during my broadcasting school years. I met a guy, he got me a job. So I felt very lucky, and I never had to leave.
Wow. And you touched on something a moment ago that is, I think, hypercritical for the success of any great entrepreneur, which was you didn't really have the ability to do much of anything else. Like, you were terrible at school, right? And I find a lot of successful people are sort of backed into their own greatness. I mean, I am functionally unhireable in anything else other than what I'm great at. And I think it sounds like you had some of the same feeling, like, I don't know, this school is not for me, but this radio thing, this sounds like a lot of fun.
I wasn't good in school, Dan, because I didn't really want to be a pharmacist. Again, it was a placeholder till I figured out what I wanted to do. But I wanted to be on the radio. So the passion of that really is what fired me up. And everything follows. When you're really into something, it's going to be something that you'll do no matter how bad it gets. Now, to your point about not making money and were you discouraged? Yes, there was a point where I was working at this radio station and I was making $100 a week. Now, this is in the 70s. And even in the 70s, that wasn't good money. I got to tell you. Okay.
Right. In the 1770s. Yeah. But
well, that's what they say when you're making, when you reference a time where they say, and he was making $20,000 a year, but it was in the 60s. And they put it in that context. And yes, in certain decades, that is good money. But in the 70s, $100 a week was not. But again, I was a bit discouraged, but that still didn't put me out of the box. I still wanted to pursue it, and I stuck with it. Now, the fact that there are these barriers and these discouraging moments do take some people out of the pipeline, which is good because they're just clogging it and you want to move past them. There should be filters to take people out, like pharmacy school. Here's the filter. One of the filters. Well, the fact that I was not doing well, but in the 2nd year of pharmacy school back then, you had to dissect a cat because a cat's anatomy is very much like a human's. This is how much training you get just to dispense pills and put cotton in a vial. Anywho, but when I was dropping out, I said, listen, answer me this. Why do you have to dissect a cat to be a pharmacist? And he said something, Dan, that applies to everything. He said, because if it was easy, everybody would be a pharmacist. And that applies to everything. Certain
Yes.
people have a stamina for certain things, others don't. And we need these filters to take out people that are just kind of wasting their time and your time. And that's why things should be hard. If it was easy, everybody would be a movie star or whatever. Because it's hard, only the real committed people get it.
And that is the exact people that we're talking to right now. And I'm so pleased that is my audience, because those are the people who deserve the second chances and the encouragement. And so I want to talk to you about the Chicago radio market when you first started, or you first started really getting legs in your career. How did you see it, and what was your vision for it?
I thought, because of what you touched on earlier, that, well, most of the market is being either a disc jockey playing music or having some kind of talk show, which was not that omnipresent back then. It was basically an all news channel and then maybe one or two all talk stations.
Mm-hmm.
And the all talk stations were very older sounding. They were talking to my parents and grandparents. And that was pretty much the drumbeat of AM radio that had talk on it. There was no talk on FM back then. In Chicago, the Tribune Company had a newspaper, a TV station, and a radio station. And the atmosphere of the company was very conservative. Thus, Chicago was very conservative because the Tribune Company kind of ruled the roost on the culture, believe it or not. And they controlled the big media pieces. So that's the way people thought. And it was rather boring. And then you had a mayor who kept a lid on everything. Mayor Daley was his name. And he would not let movies be made in Chicago because he thought Hollywood had some people that he didn't gel with, and he didn't want that outside influence in the city of Chicago. It was really locked down, airtight.
Yeah.
And then in the mid-late 70s, he died. That popped a little bit. And then towards the late 70s is when I joined up with Steve Dahl, and we created this talk format on FM that had never really been done before. And what we were talking about was way different than what they had been talking about on these talk stations prior. The atmosphere for people of a younger demographic, in our 20s, and we were talking to people in their teens and 20s. And finally, they had some kind of blowback in their arena where they were hearing us talk about things they talked about. And they liked that, because before that, it was just talking to their parents and grandparents.
Yeah. And so as you started to carve out this unique path in the very conservative, very political city, what kind of resistance did you encounter?
Well, I mean, it's funny because the number one morning show prior to us getting on was this guy by the name of Wally Phillips, and he had a 25 share. Now, let me explain what that is.
Yeah.
That means that 25 out of 100 people listened to him. That's a huge number. And let me give you a comparison today because of the nature of the business. If you get a 4 share, that's considered good. That's how different the business is. Imagine a 25 share and the dominance he had in the mornings. Well, we start up and we're talking, it was, to some people's mind, crazy talk and stuff. Oh my God, what are they talking about? So he started, and this is the mistake he made. He started talking about us, which we wanted to do. That was our bait out there. We threw that out there because we thought if he talks about us on the number one show, people are going to go, I don't know what he's talking about, but I want to go listen to what he's talking about. So
clearly he's not talking positively about you.
Right. He drove people to our show. And I heard years ago that the people that listen to, say, a Howard Stern, Rush Limbaugh, half of the people listen to hate them. But they don't care because they're still in the tent, and still made them multimillionaires. The haters, you want them as part of it because they drive the bus with you. As much as they hate you, they still listen.
And even though you were doing well, did you hit resistance from management or city or politics?
Dan, management was just counting the money. They could not have been happier. The only resistance, I remember, if we did stuff, say, about the Catholic Church or a certain ethnic group, they usually had a spokesperson call our boss and try to drum up some trouble, but our boss would just say, hey, free speech, and they're not doing anything that's not true. It might be something you don't like hearing, but it's pretty much true. Yeah.
Well, was there a time in between, like when you started and when you really started to make a lot of money, that when you were breaking through, that people were pushing back at you and you had to push through that? Or did you just sort of sail through all of that?
We found our niche. Life is find a niche and fill it. And we found a niche, and the detractors didn't matter because we had power and we were doing something that was very much in our right to do. There was nothing, we weren't killing people. We weren't setting buildings on fire, maybe a few records that you mentioned. But beyond that, there was nothing there that we were doing that was illegal or whatever. So what was the problem? And exactly what we wanted was that kind of percussion.
So you were looking for that?
Yes. I mean, we didn't deliberately go, let's say this, because we'll push this hot button. We were just doing what we did, what I felt I was good at, in what I thought about, and what Steve thought he was good at and thought about it. We talked about it. And that was just so different. We stuck out because it had not been done before. That's why the people that didn't like it, because they had never heard it before. They didn't know why they didn't like it sometimes, but it had not been on the radio, so it must be bad.
Did you want to get famous? Was that a goal?
No, I wanted to have a job that I could do my whole life, that I'd enjoy my whole life. And that was my goal at the outset, a cool job like being on the radio. I thought it was so cool. And I think a lot of it was because when I started high school, the Beatles came to America, and that whole British invasion, and disc jockeys got to hang out with the Beatles. And I thought, oh my God, that's so cool. How can I do that? And that's really what the force was. It was, I get to hang out with cool people if I did that. It had nothing to do with I'll be famous in the process. That was a byproduct. And to have that notoriety in the city I grew up in was just a bonus. I was walking around half the time going, I have to pinch myself because this is so cool in the city I grew up in, and the third largest city in the country.
Yeah. And who are some of the people that you met that are memorable?
Oh, I mean, well, mentioned the Beatles, Paul McCartney, Ringo Starr, and you're going to put me in a thing because I'm hearing and seeing all these names in my head.
Yeah.
And now they're all, and I mentioned Joe Walsh, and and I met Wolfman Jack. I have to mention that because this was about a year or two after the movie American Graffiti came out. And I got to meet him. And here's the other thing about meeting people, and you like them, and then you want them to be cool. And then you fear that if they're a jerk, you're going to have that in your head, and it's going to ruin the whole impression you have of them. And that's why I was always kind of hesitant sometimes. Do I want to meet these people? Because I have such a respect for them. And then if they turn out to be an ass, that ruins it. Right? Yeah. Because here's what I do, Dan. I'm watching TV or listening to some music, and I'll think, oh my God, I met that person on the TV show, or that artist, or whatever. And it's a lot more than not, where I'm going, oh my God, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Albert Brooks.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But he used to call the show semi-often and just talk for 90 minutes. And we were so thrilled because we were huge Albert Brooks fans. And it was just a thing of, wow, that's so cool that he would call, and that kind of stuff where you're not expecting it, and then they like you. And then I got to go to dinner with Albert one night, and it was in heaven. Right. And then we would do this thing. We were the first ones to go and cover the Academy Awards on the radio. We'd stand on the red carpet. And as people were coming down the red carpet, you could grab anybody that would want to talk to you. This is way before you see all these shows now, and they've stopped. This was 40 years ago. We did that. And here's a moment where we're standing there, and there's John Malkovich, right? He's coming down the carpet. And you just kind of, hey, come on, you want to talk? We're from Chicago. And we start waving to John Malkovich, and he comes over, Stephen, Garry, how you doing? And I'm like, he knows who we are?
Oh, wow.
That kind of thing. Yeah. Some of this stuff is just personal favorite stuff where the writer, David Sedaris, he was on Letterman one night, and he was talking about when he goes out to do book signings, he puts a tip jar on the table as a joke, right?
Right.
Well, as it happens, the next day, he was in Chicago for a book signing. And I thought, great, I'm going to go say hello. and get my book signed. So I go and I'm standing in line and I got a big pocket full of change because I had just seen him on Letterman. So I get up to him and I take the pocket of change out and I put it in his jar. And I was the only one who did this. Apparently nobody else saw the show last night or whatever. And he looks at the jar and he goes, oh, I was just kidding about that. I said, well, I saw you on David Letterman last night and I thought I'd give you a tip. And he said, well, thank you. And he said, what's your name? And I go, Garry. He goes, what's your last name? And I said, Meier. And he said, I used to listen to you guys when I lived in Chicago and was moving furniture. David Sedaris knows who I am. I mean, that kind of stuff for those people that were at Second City, your Stephen Colbert's, Steve Carell, apparently they all listened because they were all at Second City when we were on.
And to that point, you developed this cult-like following. And did you strategize on that? Did you and Steve sit down and say, okay, what can we do to really get more buzz out there? Did you look at it like a business where you were working to constantly grow your fan base, or did you just let it happen organically?
It was organic. And the only stuff that's worked for me, Dan, has been organic. Whenever I've tried to force anything, never got it. It had to just kind of happen. And I use the Zen philosophy. The harder I try, the further away something gets. And then and it comes to me. That's that Zen philosophy. And that's the same with radio. All of the radio success I had happened organically. I was in a position where somebody said, this I think is going to work, where I wasn't really pushing for it, and it worked. Otherwise, no. And to your point, we did not sit down and go, okay, let's do A, B, and C, and this will get these things to happen. If we were that good, we'd be multi-zillionaires. If we could plan things that happen to land in the stratosphere, then we'd be marketing geniuses. We just did what we did, and people were included. The credo that we followed, and this is what we said all the time, it was a high school with money. And everybody was part of the party, and that's why the listeners got into it, because we would do these appearances, and we'd be amongst the listeners often. And there was no barrier, or we're at arm's length from you. We're out there, we're having a good time, and you're included. And that was very important.
And it's clear that you weren't working on your brand, but I think without realizing it, you did an amazing amount of brand building because you made yourself super accessible. So it wasn't Steve and Garry on the radio. It was, oh, I'm going to listen to my friends.
Right.
And one of the things that people in business forget about is that we make decisions based almost solely on our emotions. We buy from the people that we like and trust. And you made yourself so likable and so trustworthy that the fan base just grew exponentially.
On the air was what we were and are. It was this is my on-air persona and this is my off-air. We were that on the air. And that's why people could identify with us. We talk about our stuff, whether it was good or bad, our personal stuff. And that's what people had not heard before. And that's what attracted the audience. Now, I want to piggyback a thought here where you said, did you plan it? We did have incredible marketing. We had these ad agencies that knew exactly how to market us with TV commercials, billboards, and print back then, which was still strong. That was a big part of it because you have to get into the marketing of things to make it happen too. You can't just pretend that it's going to take off. Sometimes it does, and maybe it does a little more today because you have so many platforms that are easy to enter. But back then you needed to market. And now radio does not market much at all. They're going through a lot of headwinds and they have cut mostly their marketing budgets, which I think is a big mistake.
Were you part of the marketing team? Were you helping to drive?
Yes, I really enjoy marketing. I was involved as much as they'd let me. I'd throw ideas to the ad agency all the time. Let me give you a quick example.
Yeah.
We were starting on a new radio station, and it turned out we were starting on St. Patrick's Day, and the ad agency wanted to do a big campaign. Steve and Garry are back, and it was going to be on St. Patrick's Day, and we were going to be at a bar and broadcast from a bar, St. Patrick's Day, Chicago, nice combo platter, soup and sandwich, or gin and tonic, or whatever you want to call it. So I came up with this ad idea. I said, how about Steve and Garry get the green light? Because you've got St. Patrick's Day, we're back, And that's what they went with. Steve and Garry get the green light. And that kind of stuff that kind of built a nice little ad.
Wow. And so as you were doing this, as you're growing the audience, are you looking at this and going like, wow, was it ever hard to believe that it was you doing this, that it was you on the billboards?
Yeah, I had a number of out-of-body experiences where I'm looking from above going, holy crap.
Yeah.
This happened. How did I get here? But I guess it was because, Dan, I didn't go for, I'm going to be a big star and that has to happen. I didn't look at it that way. And that's why it happened the way it did. And I looked at it and went, wow, this is cool. I didn't go with that. I have to have this, otherwise it's a failure. I just went with it and it became a success. I don't want the tail wagging the dog. I wanted to just have it all just unfold. And if it was good, then it will be rewarded. If it's not, well, that's the way it goes.
And I'm hearing this great thread through everything that we're talking about, which is it was passion. You weren't into pharmacy, but you love radio. You stayed with the passion, what you love doing. And I've found a lot of entrepreneurs get really scared about success. So they put the passion to the side and they think, well, strategy is going to drive us there. The thing they're passionate about might not do it. And you seem super detached to whether or not you were liked, you were successful. I think your big attachment was, is it fun for me? Do I have that right?
Yes. And to your point about people telling you that it's not happening or whatever, I just watched an entrepreneur today, and he said, I can find all kinds of naysayers that told me, don't do it. It's the wrong idea. Stop. Now, he came up with this equation. And this is pretty amazing. He said, that's why we have the 1%. His point was, you're going to always find somebody that says, no, you can't do it. Stop. It's not going to make you any money, or you're going to starve or whatever. And I did have that moment when I was working for $100 a week and I was going with this girl, and her mother said, hey, is this really working? Shouldn't you find something that's going to make a living if you're going to be with my daughter? Well, we broke up. And here's the funny part. Years later, I run into this woman and she says that her mother was a huge fan. Yeah.
That's great.
So that's the way that goes.
When she said that, was there any part of you that went, God, I wonder if she's right?
Well, when you're making $100 a week, and I thought I was going to be at this one radio station a year and then I was in the suburban Chicago area, and I wanted to get back into the city, into the big station. I gave myself, and here's why you probably shouldn't set time limits all the time. I said to myself, I'll be at this station a year. I'll get back downtown. 3 years later, I'm still there. And that's when I started to think, man, my timetable is off. And I put a lot of pressure on myself. But just as I got to that point, and this is also something about my life, when I'm really looking at maybe a dark moment, there's a light at the proverbial end of the tunnel. And that light was, I got a call from a radio station that I had sent, and they said, hey, we have an opening. Boom. And I was back in a big Chicago station.
Wow. Was that Loop?
Yes. And I was doing the all-night show, and I was thrilled.
I bet.
Thrilled. Yeah. I was, all right, here we go, Dad. I made 100 a week at the other station. I went to 250 a week.
More than doubled your money.
More than doubled. And that was fairly good money for late 70s.
No kidding. Wow.
Yeah, fairly good. I could live on that.
That's amazing.
Yeah, right. And, you know, there's what I call the 3 silent killers of success, right? Sleep, stress, and productivity. Now, badass entrepreneurs never get enough sleep. We all have way too much stress, and that puts our productivity in the crapper. I found something that beats the silent killers. It's a technology that lives on your phone. Now, I know this sounds crazy, but it's sound waves that put your brain into states of relaxation and focus. Now, when I first heard about this, I just thought it was bullshit, right? But then I heard that this company, they're called Nucalm, Nucalm. Nucalm is being used by the Army, by U.S. Special Forces, the FBI, professional football teams, pilots, surgeons are using Nucalm instead of anesthesia. And what's his name? Tony Robbins just jumped on board with Nucalm, right? So I thought, at the very least, I got to try this. So I downloaded the app, I put it on my phone, and it just sounds like music. But oh my God,
After one session, I was on fire. 20 minutes of New Calm was like 2 cups of coffee. And then on the other side, I use New Calm at night and it puts me out like a light. I wake up in the morning, shot out of a cannon. Now, if you want a free week of New Calm, it's super simple. Just text the word CALM, C-A-L-M, to this number, 213-409-8366. 213-409-8366, and text the word CALM, C-A-L-M. Get more sleep, feel less stress, and blow your productivity out of the water. Just text CALM, C-A-L-M, to this number, 213-409-8366, and get a free week of New Calm. Free. Okay, so sorry for going off like this. I'm just super fired up about it. Let's get back into this.
I had heard you talk about a conversation that you had with Ringo Starr, where he said, but when you filled this in, something about it being on stage, he didn't have a sense of what the Beatles were like from the perspective of the audience. What was that like for you, being behind the microphone? Did you have a sense of the audience, or were you just sort of walled off to that?
Well, I think because we did a lot of appearances at bars and things, we could see our audience, and it was young and rather rebellious, which we liked. We liked that whole, hey, F you, we're going to have a good time, we're going to have fun. And when Ringo said that, that is an interesting perspective, because we were on stage and we're watching all these girls go crazy, and we couldn't quite figure out what that looked like because I'm in the center of the hurricane. I can't see the whole hurricane. And that's what he was saying. The fact is, when I was on the radio, I'm thinking everybody who has a radio can listen to me. Everybody didn't, but that is a pretty powerful thought. I remember reading an article about Muhammad Ali on a plane with this columnist, and Muhammad and this columnist are getting ready to land in Washington. And Muhammad points out the window and says, I could ring every one of these doorbells and people would know who I am. And he was right. I mean, because that's the breadth of this man's fame. And that's got to be pretty powerful.
And you were something like that in the city of Chicago.
Well, I think to a point, but I mean, there were people that didn't know me from a bag of crap in Chicago. That's fine. We had enough listeners to be successful. And that didn't, if somebody didn't know, if I was introduced to somebody, they didn't know. I didn't care. That's the way it is. There are people that probably don't know who Brad Pitt is. Or whatever. I mean, that's the way it goes. Doesn't matter. He's still very successful.
And did you ever say to yourself, I want to see just how far I can take this power that I have with the audience?
Yes, we wanted to overthrow the government. That was a plan, and failed. I don't know where we would have gone beyond where we went with it, but it was just keeping the ratings up, and that kept us afloat, and that's how that worked. Ratings and revenue. That's the whole monkey trick of radio.
Gotcha. And so I want to get into Disco Demolition Night in just a minute, but I want to know, what were some of the favorite things that you did on air, like your favorite things, not necessarily the most famous or like got the most fans, but the most interesting things that to you?
I think doing the Academy Awards was because it had never been really done the way we did it on the air. I got to tell you, one thing that we really enjoyed, we would go and narrate the Rose Bowl parade on the radio. And what we did, we told our audience to turn the sound down on their TV and put the radio on, and we would narrate the Rose Parade. And we did that a couple times. Loved doing that. And I loved I had never seen this parade before we went and did it up close. I'd seen it on TV. You cannot really get the experience of what those floats look like unless you're there, and they're all made out of flowers.
Yeah.
And that's something that I really enjoyed, that kind of stuff. We would go to Hawaii every year and broadcast from Hawaii. We did our show twice on a cruise ship, one through the Panama Canal and one up into Alaska, that kind of stuff.
And it sounds like such a simple thing, like turn off your TV and listen to us, but that's super innovative. And the ad people must have been licking their chops going, oh my God, we're getting so many more listeners now.
We had a lot of sponsors for our Hawaii trips and all these other trips, because that was something that nobody else was doing in the way we did it.
And it sounds like it was mostly in the moment. Do I have that right? That you weren't planning, strategizing, but just coming up with ideas as things were happening?
Well, again, our marketing team would throw ideas at us that they thought would fit well. And the station had a whole group of people that were on board as far as the way to promote not only our show, but the entire station.
Yeah.
And everything was working. And all of the other shows, we were all simpatico, and it really flowed.
You would start to see, because you guys were innovators, you were an innovator, that other radio shows were doing what you did. Was there a sense of frustration or competition, or we're going to take those guys out? What was that like?
We never really got challenged to where it got to, oh, now looking in our rearview mirror and somebody's coming up on us in Chicago. Here's something that's kind of funny. When we would travel, we'd put the radio on, and after several years of being together, and we'd hear these duos on the radio, and you could tell some of them were doing our material. That's how I knew they were copying it, but they were doing it badly. And that made us cringe a little bit, but we got a kick out of it. If we had that kind of an influence, that's pretty good.
That's really something. And what a great way to stay in your business and not feel frustrated. Because I've talked to a lot of people who are like, whoa, I put that online and someone stole it. And well, come up with something else, because it's the attachment to your material, I think, that can make a really successful, happy experience start to sour.
I'm fortunate that I can come up with a lot of material, so I don't have to rely on just one or two pieces. It just seems coming, and I'm happy for that.
So I have to talk about Disco Demolition Night. And I want to start with, how did that even begin?
My partner, Steve, had been working on a station, and it was a rock station, and they flipped formats to disco. He left, and that's how we got hooked up, because he ended up at the station I was doing all nights on, and they hired him to do mornings. That's how we met on the air.
Yeah.
And when he started, he was really pissed off about the whole situation. He had moved from Detroit to Chicago and then ended up getting this format pulled from him, and now it's disco, and he didn't want to stay for that. We started talking about that on the show, and he started playing disco records, and we had a turntable. Take the needle and scratch the Bee Gees, whoever we were playing, and then he would break the record on the air so you could hear it breaking. And that became the momentum. And then people started calling, do it again. Every morning we'd play another disco record and break it. And then we go to do this at bars, and the places were packed. We'd come out and break records, and it was a fever, and it started to really build. This was in March of that year. And now we're coming into the summer, and the marketing guy at White Sox Park, who happened to be the son of the owner of the White Sox, said, hey, why don't you guys come and do a big disco demolition at the ballpark between games at a doubleheader?
Wow. So it was them.
Well, yeah, they put the thing out there. We bet.
Wow.
We thought, okay, this is 50,000 seats. So that's going to be interesting. The deal was you got in for 98 cents. The frequency was 97.9. So you got in for 98 cents. And you had to bring a disco record, which would be put into a big bin between games and blowing up. Well, we get to the park, and there are thousands of people milling around that couldn't get in. The place was packed, and another several thousand couldn't get in. Okay, so we go up into the press box. We're watching the first game, and then, okay, it's time to go down there. We go down onto the field in a Jeep, and now people are completely smashed. They've been drinking for 3 hours.
I just have to kind of paint the picture of the Chicago White Sox fans. Chicago is a beer town, and it is a drinking town. And so I can only imagine what that crowd must have been like.
Yeah, and let me paint this picture. It was January 6th, 43 years ago. That's the look. But it was in a ballpark.
Gotcha.
Not at the Capitol building.
Gotcha. Right.
And we're on the warning track on the Jeep, so we're right up against the wall of the fans. And now they're throwing beer down at us, and they're throwing records at us. They were out of their frickin' mind. And we pull out onto center field, and my partner had written a song about disco demolition. It was a remake of Rod Stewart's Do You Think I'm Sexy? It was Do You Think I'm Disco? He sings that, and then they have their guy. See, the White Sox have a scoreboard that when a White Sox hits a home run, the scoreboard throws out fireworks. So they had a fireworks guy already embedded in the White Sox. So he set the fireworks with the big giant bin of records. And then we do the countdown and the records blow up in center field. Okay. We get back on the Jeep. We leave the park. We go outside the park. We go back up into the press box and we see all of these people have run onto the field and they're picking up the records that had been blown up and they're tossing the pieces of them. And there's a fire in center field and it's total mayhem. And then they are trying to get these people off the field so they can do the second game. And they finally did. They had to call the police, and it was crazy time. The field was a little ripped up. I don't think it was ripped up to the point where they couldn't play, but they forfeited the second game. Now, the next day, we're international because this goes all around the globe. Okay, let's go from that moment all the way to now. Over the year, the event has taken on some pretty ugly appearances, and it was over the years said to be anti-gay, anti-black, because gays and blacks were disco music, and it took on some real ugliness. And I have to be honest with you, I didn't see any of that when we did it. I saw just a lot of frustration of people that wanted to blow off some steam on a summer night. And I didn't get that. And we didn't feel that when we went out and did these appearances. There was no racial or anti-gay sentiment. I didn't see it. History has done what it does, and now it's a rather toxic thing to look at.
And it's really interesting that you say that, Garry, because if you're in any industry, in any business long enough, social norms and mores will start to change underneath you. And the things that you did that were fun and light and joyful, some of them can start taking a turn. I was in LAX with my mom once, and the person behind the desk at one of the airlines was like rude. And she said, I just have to remember this isn't my world anymore. Because growing up, people were just overly polite at places like airplanes and train stations and things. But when things start to change, and I think that's what we're experiencing now in the world. I think that's part of why January 6th happened, because things are changing and people are having a hard time with it. As things started to change in your industry, and you mentioned it with how people are looking at Disco Demolition Night, how did you kind of weather that? And how do you deal with it now, that change?
Well, I pretty much started to ignore the anniversary years ago because I saw the black clouds around it. And my daughter was in London taking classes, and she was in was either a music class or some kind of culture class. And the professor brought up Disco Demolition, and she's sitting there going, what? And he really vilified the whole thing. And here we are in London many years later. And that's where it had gone. And I already saw where it was kind of getting into that atmosphere. I know the Bee Gees, I've seen them interviewed, what's left of them now. But over the years, they even said that event in Chicago really kneecapped us, although it did for a while, but they came back. It didn't stop out everything disco.
No.
And I just left it at that. But there was something else, I think, that tells you what you're looking for here. The FCC came after us. Content on the show. They said it was lewd or obscene or whatever. Howard Stern went through this too. And here's the scary part about that. All it takes, the FCC doesn't monitor radio stations around the country. They don't have the man or woman power for that. Here's how they go after people. Somebody sends them a tape of something they don't like, and then they investigate, decide if they're going to make trouble. And that is frightening. Whereas one person cannot like it, but hundreds of thousands can like it, but the one person can derail the whole thing. And we went through for several years to get out of that. One person. And we had an idea. We kind of speculated, and I think we're pretty right in our thinking, that it was a competitor.
Did things change for you in the show after that? Was there a dramatic shift after that?
Well, a little bit, but I think we figured it out and knew we didn't do anything wrong. And then we did get past it and carried on.
Yeah. And that's an important piece too, because in every business experience, no matter what you're in, something's going to happen. And you can always say, oh, I wish that didn't happen, but something's going to happen that shifts the mood and the texture and tapestry of your business. And it might not even be something that you created or something that you did like Disco Demolition Night, which is just pure fun, but then takes on a completely different feel. And what you talk about, wow, now I'm being careful with what I say. And I'm just curious, like, how do you think you got through it? How do you think you got back on track to where you felt comfortable again on the air and not worried?
Here's the thing, Dan. We did all of our stuff before the internet. And I was so glad that a lot of my career was not around during the internet, because that's where things really spread fast and furious. And some of it gets and repackaged and it's not what you said. And this is the nightmare a lot of people are in right now, mostly some stand-up comedians. Dave Chappelle's going through this, where he's being banned from certain places because he did some trans whatever. And this is the internet doing what it does and spreading things before you've had a chance to really analyze, if you're the person that's under the microscope, what's going on. You're already banned and vilified, and it could be rather benign, but the way the internet takes things and flares them up, who knows? I think that's a big part of it. It was before the internet.
And you think that the fact that time allowed people to forget, or it moved into the past instead of, like you say, on the internet, on Facebook, on Instagram, you can keep anything old present and keep people angry about it.
The other thing about the internet, no guardrail, really no rules. And people can see anything for the most part and get away with it. Whereas before, the outlets were radio, TV, newspaper, and they had, and still do, I would imagine, guardrails where you can't just say anything. You can't just say, this person is this, and say that's okay. And I'm watching this trial, Alex Jones. This blows my mind. He said that the Sandy Hook thing was staged. And who says this stuff? He really believes this? That wouldn't fly radio. You'd be on one day and it'd be over. But the internet doesn't have, it does. You can still sue somebody. Yeah. And that's what's happening to him. But this is where we're at.
Have you, in recent years, 5 years, 10 years, gotten any like hate mail off of Disco Demolition Night? Does it still show up?
No. Well, no, we're talking 2 generations now that don't even, they thought of maybe when it happens on the anniversary. But there's so much time now that it's gotten swallowed, I believe, into the atmosphere of, well, that's nostalgia or whatever. If you hear it brought up every now and then, it has that ugliness about it and then it goes away. But for the most part, I don't see or hear anything about it.
When you see that or hear about it, does it bring back good memories of the experience?
I'll see, there'll be a picture usually that accompanies these articles, and I'll see myself standing there next to Steve, and I've got a beard, real long hair, and I can tell you the day how it started like it was yesterday. That is firmly etched in my head the whole day because of what happened. It's one of those things where you never forget it.
So what's next for Garry Meier and your world?
Well, I'm doing this podcast 5 days a week. I've been doing it for 7 years. I like doing that, the Garry Meier Show. And I'm doing media coaching, and I really enjoy that. And working on a number of other things involving people that you and I both know, where we're within a group of men that are entrepreneurs and sharing different ideas and seeing what we can put together.
Right. And what drives you these days?
I still like doing this. I had been doing it for a long time, but I still don't go, oh, I got to do that today. No, I still think, wow, what can I say today that might be interesting, humorous, or make people think that, oh, the world's not completely falling apart? Because I don't do any politics on the show.
Yeah.
I've never done politics. It's not because of the last few years. I've never done it. And that was never my wheelhouse. I didn't find it entertaining. And I think I've been proven right.
And if people do want to connect with you, and if people are interested in your media coaching, how can they connect with you?
Garry Meier Show at GarryMeier.com. Okay, with Garry Meier Show at GarryMeier.com, because it's spelled Garry. I know, a little odd.
Right.
E-I-E. Yeah.
And I'll definitely put that in the notes. And I really want to thank you on a couple of different levels. I guess I was a little concerned that you were like, whoa, I was like #1 in Chicago. Now I'm doing Dan's little puppet show. But you have been so incredibly gracious and so kind and so
Well, now that you say it's a puppet show, Dan, I didn't know it was a puppet show. Now I'm concerned.
I love this thread. It was all about your passion and the joy of what you do. And I think I found that so many entrepreneurs get into their business and they lose the passion because they're so worried about maintaining the income and increasing their revenue that they forget why they got into it in the first place. And it seems to me that you never quite lost that. And we didn't talk too much about the end, but I'm guessing that when you felt it was over, that was the walkaway time.
Well, radio was changing dramatically. And some of it I don't even recognize. And it's sad because this is not the fizz and excitement that we're hearing now that I experienced a number of years ago. And that's really what happened. I didn't leave it necessarily on my own terms. I got involved with management and decided we're going to blow everything up. We don't know why. And they did. And I thought, okay, I've got a #1 show here and it's hard to get #1 shows. And the slot I had at the last radio station has struggled since I left. And I thought you had something. A boss of mine told me many years ago, do not get rid of somebody unless you have somebody as good or better sitting in the hotel room across the street. And that applies to everything. Do not pull the trigger unless you know where that bullet's going to go, because you're asking for trouble if you don't.
Why do you suppose they did it then?
This is the atmosphere of radio. I've talked to a number of people who went through radio at the same time I did, and they all say the same thing. What the hell's going on? What are these people doing? And nobody could figure it out. And I don't know if it's because the business is not what it was and they're panicking or whatever they're doing, but don't make a decision when you're panicking. That's not good.
Yeah, right. I mean, no one has ever said that, oh my God, I was so worried and I was panicked and I made this choice and it really worked out well.
Yeah, exactly. I like to make really big decisions when I'm out of my mind.
And so when it ended for you, was it a really hard transition?
Well, I didn't expect it because I was doing well. And I thought, okay, the business is changing. Maybe it's time to move on to something else. But they're stuck in the past and everything else is going forward with podcasts and everything else. I think still believe they're the only game in town. And that's not going to work well. Like I said, 10, 20 years ago, a #1 show had a 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 shares, somewhere in there, 3 and 4. That's your mark. So that is not going the right way. And the values of these radio stations are dropping quickly. A good example, the station I was on last 20 years ago, 25 years ago was valued at $100 million. And now you could pick it up if they put it on the block for 12. Yeah, it's happening.
I'll tell you something though, a little less than a decade ago, I had a marketing company and it failed, and I'm glad that it did because it propelled me into a career that I love. But when it failed, I had a really hard time. And so I'm curious, like you're on top of the world, you are #1, you get fired. How did you weather that transition? Because that's tough.
Peaks and valleys, everybody goes through them, and there's no way you can avoid them. I don't care. You can name anybody that you can think. I don't know if they would admit the valley, but I'm sure they've all gone through it. And that's the way it is. You have to expect it's not going to sustain at that level forever. It's almost impossible. So just take it as it comes and massage it the way it can work for you now. That's all you can do. If you're going to think, well, I've got to be the same I was 40 years ago, you're going to be in for a big hurt here.
Well, I really appreciate your attitude. And it's so easy to say, and it's on every refrigerator magnet and post on the internet, like stay with it, stay positive, no matter what happens, weather the storm. But when you're actually in it, that's where you see what you're made of. And clearly, whatever you did to move yourself through the disappointment, it seems to me like you never gave up your own hope and your own confidence that you'll see it through and you'll find something that you'll be happy and satisfied again. Would you say that's accurate?
Was it Winston Churchill who said, when you're going through fire, keep going? When you think about it, okay, you can have all these, well, if this happens, I'll do this. But unless you're going through it, you just have to keep going and figure out, I'll get to the other side and then I'll figure it out and we'll just regroup. Everybody goes through this.
And I love that. I tell my clients, whatever business that you think you're not in that business. You're in the business of disappointment. You're going to be disappointed and you're going to be disappointed a lot. And it's how you handle that disappointment that's going to determine how successful you are. And Garry, I can tell you for sure, you did an amazing job and are doing an amazing job of weathering disappointment. You have a tremendous attitude. I would really love to Vulcan mind meld you into all of my clients because it would help me so much. I'd be so much more successful.
I got to tell you, this is the best puppet show I've ever been on.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And, having you here, it's really wonderful. So thank you for being on for Badass Entrepreneurs Only.
Dan, my pleasure.
Hey, one last thing. If you're feeling stuck in business life, wherever, download my book, Jumping the Gap, Kill Your Story and Take Action. In this book, you'll see how the stories that you tell yourself are stopping yourself from living your greatest life. Just text the word GAP, G-A-P, to this number, 213-409-8366. 213-409-8366, and text the word GAP. It's a short read, it's fun, it's easy, and if you hate reading like I do, you can grab the audiobook. It's at that same link. Just text the word GAP, G-A-P, to 213-409-8366. You'll love it. All right, that's it. Go out there and be badass today.